in the end, our corporation will be delivering to the United States, the people of this country, a memorial to celebrate service animals and their handlers.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that served. This is the second episode, and I'm joined today by Theresa Brandon. She is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine's story is the same. What is the same is the oath that we all took. Today, I am honored to share a piece of Theresa's story, who I met when I ran for office. Theresa is a true example of what it means to adapt and overcome. Her leadership and grit has led her to do some truly amazing things, and I'm honored to get to tell a piece of her story today. Theresa, I am so happy that you agreed to join me and to tell your story, and your story blows me away. How we met. You're the first Marine that I'm interviewing that I met post Marine Corps. So our relationship was after the Marine Corps, which I think is how a lot of Marines meet too, because when you meet another Marine, instant connection. And so the first question I have for everybody and always is, why did you join the Marine Corps?
Well, first of all, Tab, thanks so much for joining me this morning and letting me join you. It's been really cool to meet other women Marines well after I've been in service, as you can tell with the gray hair. I've been out a few years. But what made me join was back when I was in school. I graduated in 1974, which makes me 68. It's okay. I'm not sensitive about my age at all. In fact, you have to celebrate where you are anywhere in this life. I was really fortunate in that in the 1979, I had an opportunity to take a look at what am I going to do with my life. I had gone to college initially at Ball State University, ran out of money, and had the great wisdom, and I really say that today, to not take out a loan. Okay. I just didn't feel comfortable about taking out a loan with the job market was heading into disaster in the 1980s, as we know historically looking back. So I got a job with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and it was just an everyday job, got me away from music, because I really had the great fortune when I was growing up in Indiana to be immersed in music. I went to Northwest High School, had a terrific music program, got to play with the Christian Theological Seminary with some of their events. Butler University had a reading orchestra. So it just was great. I was a young artist with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, performed with them. So I just really had quite an opportunity. But I needed that moment for a break. And so I went to Blue Cross Blue Shield, did that. And then I start getting that itch again. Okay, I need to do something. So it gave me time to refocus. I started thinking about the military, and I thought, well, of the branches, I want to go with the best one there is, and that's the Marines. No question in my mind. I contacted the local recruiter, and they said, by the way, we know that there are going to be some auditions coming up soon. A Captain Herbert Day from Washington, D.C. is going out to the field to do interviews or auditions. And I said, oh, terrific. So they signed me up. He heard me play, and he gave me a guaranteed contract for an MOS in the band field. And what's funny is later on, when I was stationed at Quantico, which was close to where he lived, his daughter came to the base to take flute lessons with me. Oh, and she was turned into be a prodigy. You don't run into that every day. So it was really hysterical. I would be doing lessons with her, and the people on duty would come down to say, who are you doing duets with? And it's this young, about 11 or 12, doing duets with me. That just attests for her skill set, but that was just a unique experience. So that's how it first started, was just that way.
That is wild. And I feel like so many people don't even realize that the Marine Corps has such a big music and band, and that it is such a huge part of what the Marine Corps does. And how did you know any Marines, especially any female Marines?
I
I
did
guess.
not. I did not, didn't even cross my mind. I had a girlfriend in high school who was in the Navy. But when you think about music and the military, a lot of people don't stop to think the military is all about traditions and I don't want to say pomp and circumstance, but certainly, the parades and music was used way back when, they would use that to call out the troops or to celebrate. It was also to pick up morale. I know when I was serving with the various bands, across the field bands, we would do community events where we would go to like schools or parks and perform. I can remember one school where we had the kids all there, and I told them I invited them to come up and sit with us so they could figure out and stand right next to a Marine who was playing their instrument. Oh, they just thought that was just great and exciting for them. And so you make a positive impact on kids in that way, as well as the community, because I will tell you, sitting there playing my piccolo, you could see people in the audience who are really connecting with you. And that really made it a wonderful experience. It was like there was this bridge.
And how long did you stay in the Marine Corps and play music, and kind of what was your experience in the Marine Corps kind of overall?
Well, I joined in 1980. June of 1980, I went to Parris Island, South Carolina, home of the American Sand Flea, as you well know. Went down there. Once I finished recruit training, I went to the A school down at Little Creek. It's actually tri-service school. It's one of the places where we actually had the Army, the Navy, and the Marines all going there for the School of Music. So it certainly made great sense. I did graduate #1 in my class. It was quite an experience for me. From there, I went to Quantico. Quantico is considered the backup for the President's Own. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of the quality of performers in that particular band. In fact, some of the guys would go up to Georgetown and play jazz clubs. Another group of us played in the local Prince William Symphony Orchestra. So my opportunities as a musician were very rich, not only growing up, but especially when I joined the Marines. Here I was paid as a musician. That's not to say I wasn't a Marine. All Marines are basic riflemen. You know that. And so we still had our military duties to do, our military training. And you know what was really cool at that time? There was a true transition for women going on at that time, Tab. I was in that first group of women. They used to have another older style uniform that was kind of funky looking. But I was thrilled to be able to wear dress blues. I mean, it is the most beautiful uniform in the world and highly recognizable. To have that, to represent the Corps and to be a Marine and have that title, nobody can ever take that from me. And it's one of the most proud things I am in my entire life.
And that uniform, again, because when I came in, we were wearing that uniform. There were obviously slight variations to what we wore compared to the males, but yeah, that the bond and the just how sharp and like there's a power to it, and there's just you put it on and you stand taller, and you like, even as a musician. And I was blessed. Monica was my first duty station, and as public affairs, I was with the band all the time, and I was so amazed at the things that they did and were doing, and like composing whole pieces of like music. And then at the same time, they were up at 5 a.m. the first ones doing McMath outside of the band building. And so that dynamic is something that, I'm not a musician, but there's not a lot of opportunities to play professionally at that level, to get paid and taken care of the way you do in the Marine Corps. And so I guess that then leads me to the next question of, what would your life have looked like if you hadn't joined the Marine Corps?
I think it would have been quite different. During my service, those 9 years, we were very busy. I mean, that band traveled quite a bit. In fact, every summer they would go up to Canada. We were invited up there for a big tattoo. And we would do D&B style marching to classical music, all memorized. That was the quality of this group. So it was a very arduous duty being able to do that. But in addition to our musical duties, we had additional duties. We had administrative duties because we needed to run the band unit. At that location, I became the NCUIC, the non-commissioner officer in charge of the supply unit. And what I would later learn is it really tapped into talents that become more and more developed that I use today. I actually reassessed and reapproached how the supply unit ran, and it then became a model for all the band fields. So that was kind of a cool thing to be able to do that. We were so busy all the time, though, that I did not have time to go back to college. I had some college completed. When it came to deciding to leave the Corps, and a lot of it was because of my hearing loss. In 1985, I was in Okinawa, Japan, and they were testing the hearing of the band members. We were all sitting in those big squares, those compartment, what do you call them? The sound rooms, soundproof rooms. And they shut the door, and I'm sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden the door flies open, and the guy comes in and he says, "You need to press the button when you hear the sound." And I said, "Well, I'm waiting to hear the sound." And his eyes got real big. And that's when they discovered I was losing a lot of my hearing. Now, having been at Quantico, there are a lot of those old buildings that have the polished tile. They found that was causing band members to lose their hearing because it was just bouncing that sound right back into our ears. And compared to most other bands, so that really caused a problem for my hearing, and needed to make a decision. Do I stay in? Do I try to do something else? I did try one other billet. I was a recruiter and went to recruiting school in 86. So out of 200 Marines that attended that, of which 6 were women, I graduated number 6 in that class. And so I went on to recruiting. That was tough. That was brutal service. I made that decision. Then I needed to preserve what hearing I had, and wound up getting a medical discharge. So I am a disabled veteran. In fact, it was recently upgraded to 60%. Right ear is completely gone. And my left ear, I'm fortunate to have a hearing aid that the VA provides for me. But the main thing is, when I got out in May of 1989, I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to school. The VA will now help me. I don't have to worry about a loan. Went right back to college, finished my undergraduate degree, and then was able to get solid employment with the Illinois Secretary of State's office, which is where I was living at the time. So I know I took a long way around to answer your question.
No, but, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And I think the thing too is it's not, a lot of times the Marine Corps, it's not such a linear path, even like what we do after, because I don't like to say it changes everybody, but at least makes you like kind of like identify yourself more and identify things about yourself, or even like you lived in different places of the world. So obviously that had to have changed you a little bit and changed your perspective, or even maybe what you wanted to do or not do. And so we actually met when I ran for office, and I remember I think multiple people had told me like, oh, there's another female Marine and she's, you got to meet her and all of this stuff. And it was just like, I had no idea what I was doing when I was running for office. And so it was so awesome once we finally connected, and it was just like the instant connection of another female Marine, because I think I hadn't been back in Indiana for very long, but I'm pretty sure you're like one of the few female Marines that I met. I've met a lot of female veterans, and there's obviously still just a connection with being a veteran, but it was just so powerful to see this female Marine who went through at a time when it was completely different and in a way as a female, and being so few of them, and just to see your persona and the fact that you could still be a Marine as a female after the fact, because that was something that I struggled with. Like, can I continue to be this Marine and have this personality or is it just going to, throw people away or make people not want to interact with me? And so it was great to meet you. And I am so curious how you got involved in politics, because you do so much in politics and making change happen and doing so much. And I know we're going to talk more about the bill and the things that you're currently doing, but how did you first even get involved in that world of politics?
Well, as federal employees, whether you're in the military or in federal employment, there's a thing called the Hatch Act, which prevents us from getting involved in politics. So it wasn't something that was ever on my radar per se while I was on active duty. I wound up getting a job with the U.S. Department of Labor and got a promotion and was transferred to Dallas, Texas, where I lived and worked from 2000 until 2016, when I got ready to move back to Indiana. During all that time, I kept thinking, what am I going to do when I retire? Again, it's like, what are you going to do when you grow up? You go from one lifetime to another. I am not one of those people who can just sit around. I get bored too easily, and I just can't go there. So my first goal that I met was I wanted to retire by the time I reached age 58. And I beat my goal by 2 months. So in the spring of 2013, I successfully was able to be in a position to retire. And some of my colleagues were like, yeah, but are you sure? I said, oh, absolutely. I said, there is more to life than just working. It was the right time for me. I had started a nonprofit down in Texas down there. And about 2016, my husband and I were talking. I said, we're at this point in our life, we need to think about where do we want to end? And because he was having a few health issues and breathing issues, and Texas, everybody knows, is very hot. And that was exacerbating that. So we decided going north would make sense. And I said, well, let's take a look at Indiana. I'm from there. Lo and behold, in the summer of 2016, we moved to Indiana. So we pick up, we go. Now, you and I both can relate to this. Having been in the military, it's not strange for us just to pick up and take the whole household and go someplace new. And you don't sit there and wait for somebody to knock on the door, take you by the hand, and introduce you. You find ways to, okay, I'm in a new place. Nobody knows me, even though that's my hometown. Haven't lived here for decades. Okay. So I joined the local chamber. I reached out to my local county political party because I thought, I would like to take a look at politics and what does that look like? I didn't know anything about the process and just started helping different candidates. And I met you through connections. And it was really a fun time to connect with the community as a whole. And I think that's really important for veterans, especially. It's almost like people don't always realize whether you're in the service and changing locations or you're out of the service and you're changing locations. It's really the same. If you're going someplace new, you need to get yourself out there so that people know that you're there and that you have certain interests and you'd like to get involved. Doesn't mean you pick one path and if it doesn't work, oh, well, it failed. No, move on to the next thing. I found that true of politics. I really got involved for a number of years. As you know, I worked on one woman veterans campaign, Toby Beck. She was running for Congress. The next cycle, one of her competitors actually reached out to me, Joe Mackey, asked me to be his campaign manager. I had never been a campaign manager, but I know how to organize. I know how to strategize. I know how to get people together, and I know how to make a mission. So no different there.
But in that campaign, it was COVID too. So you had to adapt to a brand new way for campaigning as well. I mean, that was a whole different world as well. And having watched that campaign and seen that campaign, like, it was an amazing campaign. And again, even though I ran for office, I have no real political experience, but when you talked about community earlier, that was the thing about the campaign that for me resonated so much. It was about the community, and it was about what can we do for the community. And that, I think, is just, it's it's the reason why people should be running for office, right? Or the reason why people should be trying to make change happen, because it it's not perfect and we need to make it better, right? Like that's our duty. And the whole, the Marine Corps does three things. And one of those things is we create quality citizens and return them. And I think
Yeah.
you were one of just those amazing examples of, here's a quality citizen returning. And not only did you serve this time in the Marine Corps and were willing to do all these things for the Marine Corps, you then go back to your community and you're like, you know what? Haven't done enough. I think there's something I can do here. Let me just do it. I'm good at it. Let me just do it.
Well, it is a learning process too, but the thing that was, and you mentioned the COVID, yeah, that really put a damper on us, but it was like, okay, it's like anything else that you face as a Marine. It's like, okay, you adapt, you overcome, right? You've heard those words before as a Marine. And that's exactly what we did. We did more social media. That's when things were really kicking up in the social media world. That helped tremendously. I will tell you that the other thing that was really cool was getting some of the young people at Purdue University involved. We had some young people that joined our campaign, and one was at IU, not just Purdue, but IU also, two major schools in Indiana. Talk about talented. I mean, now here we are, I'm in my 60s and they're in their 20s. And we were able to communicate. It was really that mutual respect, because I saw the skill sets they had that we really needed. I know how to put a plan together. I know how to bring the people together and make a mission, but I needed people with individual skills that could do certain components. And I will never forget one young man by the name of Matt, who created this whole campaign in the community process and had maps and made them interactive. It was like, wow, this is really cool. We had another young man who went to Ball State, and his communication skills, in fact, he's now a reporter up in Lafayette. Cameron de Blasio was just tremendous with his skill sets. And then we had a lot of different people in the community who just wanted to participate. So finding a way to communicate with all those different folks, bringing them together, that was what I wanted to do. And we were successful at that. So, but if we hadn't had such a tremendous candidate, because it wasn't about any of us.
I think that, again, I'm a huge advocate for veterans running for office. And, you and I talked, it's not about a political party. Like it's about the people. And that's what we really have to get back to, and about having these things that like, oh, we need to change this or we need to adjust this. What do we do to get it done? And it can't just be one person, right? That's the thing. It's not just one person that can get it done. And so, yeah, that campaign, it exemplified that. You didn't know how to do something, so you found somebody who knew how to do it, and you let them run and you let them do it. And I think that campaign speaks for itself as well. But the fact that then from there, like, you didn't stop, and I don't want to but you were just in DC. And so can you tell me a little bit about that and like what you recently have done in DC and what you're doing now? And you're kind of, I don't know the proper term, but you're not on the campaign side now. You're like, you are making change and watching it happen and going through the whole process. And so if you could tell us more about that, I think that's where we're going to have a lot of conversation as well.
Well, I appreciate having an opportunity to talk about this new project that I'm involved with, because it is just thrilling. I met back in 2013, a woman by the name of Susan Bahari. She's a world-renowned artist. And I was working on a project in Texas where I founded a nonprofit to save a local pet cemetery that was a community asset, had been around for decades, and it was almost lost on the auction block. We were able to successfully save that property and decided to enhance that property by putting a war dog monument on that property. We had enough land that we could do that. Well, the local community was just enthralled that this small group of people got together, saved the property, and we were going to go on and do some things. So there were articles and newspapers and everything else. Susan heard about us wanting to do a war dog monument, reached out to us, and the short story is she wound up getting the contract to create the statue for that monument. Fast forward to when I was on the campaign, she reached out to me again. She knew my skill set, saw how I ran that nonprofit, and wanted me to get involved with the National Service Animals Monument Corporation. At that time, I was running the campaign. I said, Susan, I really can't. I'm already all in on this other thing, but keep me in mind. Fast forward again to May of 2021. She's contacting me again. She goes, Theresa, I really need you if you're available. I said, well, you're in luck. I'm actually at a point where I can say yes. And so from that point, from June of 2021, I did a SWOT analysis. I started taking a look at the corporation. It needed a complete overhaul. And she saw what I did in Texas and wanted me to have that same kind of community outreach, that same kind of organizational structure. The board voted me in to join the board in July. At their annual meeting in September, they voted me to be the president, which is where I serve today. In the last 18 months, from that June until December, we did a lot of stuff, creating a working board, establishing branding materials, bringing other people on in positions of responsibility. Again, I don't have to do it all. Even people who are in leadership positions understand you get good people to work with you on the team, and you work as a team, and you keep the transparency there. Anybody who's worked with me knows I am all about the division of labor. I'm all about keeping everybody informed, and everybody needs to carry their pack. And that's really important. Well, Susan decided she wanted to try and see about building this memorial in Washington. Before I came on board, they had tried a bill. It did not go through. And so I'm looking at it differently now. I had researched why did the first bill fail? Why did other groups fail? Wrote the bill, rewrote it. We introduced it, we gave it, and we had sponsors. Very fortunate to have bipartisan support. Senator Blumenthal, Senator Blackburn, both parties there. We had other congressional members of Congress, Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina. We had a Democrat from Pennsylvania, Susan Wild. So this was, across the board, which really represented what Susan wanted, using this concept of celebrating animals, service animals and their handlers, to bring people together. And we're trying to use this project to bring people together to celebrate these national heroes, in my opinion. They've been with us serving across history, Tab. It's just really been incredible. Well, this bill, because we were asking for property in Washington, we had to go through the Commemorative Works Act of 1986. The short story is, when you look at Washington and all the statues and monuments there in the early 1980s, Congress said, you know what? We need to start taking a look at our limited resource of land and really make sure we have specific rules that limit, so that we only get really meaningful statues. Not that any of them in Washington are not meaningful, but they had to really start making some criteria for that. So the CWA, the Commemorative Works Act, required that we go before a commission, which was I'm going to screw this up, National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, otherwise known as the Commission. We had to present to them to get permission to move forward with this bill. If we can convince them, our bill would have died. Okay. So here we are. I'm going, okay, Susan, I've worked with federal government. The CWA has 4 corners. We are only focusing on what's in this act as far as what we present to them. So we had 20 minutes to do a presentation. Okay.
That's not much time.
I know it is not. So we had Susan do the introduction for 4 minutes. We had 3 other ladies that did their piece for, I think, 6 minutes total. I gave myself 10 minutes to do history over 2 centuries.
10 minutes for history over 2
Okay,
centuries.
I really had that really written out. And what I used was a timeline of historical moments from about 200 years ago up to now. And if it hadn't been for the fact that we had an education program committee, they gave me the chunks of information about animals that served with us and with handlers and made a difference in our lives. I mean, you look at all the horses way back in time, the cavalry, and a lot of them were lost in combat, unfortunately. But then you also look at the transition over time. We no longer use cavalry, we have tanks. So we don't use horses like we used to. You look at dogs. Way back World War I, the government would ask people, if you have a pet and you're willing to let the government use it in a combat, we would really appreciate that. And we'll return your dog if they live. And you get a certificate. I'm not kidding you. This is the kind of history we're talking about. And then, of course, as we come forward with Vietnam and Korea, those dogs became more like sentry dogs and helping to, search out the enemy. Today in Afghanistan and Iraq and those more recent wartime war zones, we have military working dogs, very highly trained bomb sniffers, and they work with a handler like this, and they're really a part of the troops. So we've seen that transition. In fact, when you look over time, we talk about service animals providing safety, security, and independence. We think about the safety are like the working dogs with our police and law enforcement. And I don't mean just local police, but the federal agencies, the bomb squads at the airports, FBI, any of those agencies, DEA, they really look out for the safety of us in our communities. Security. Now we're talking about like the military working dogs in a combat zone, but we're also talking about dolphins and sea lions on the seacoast. They have been working with the Navy since 1959. Did you know that?
I did, but it was one of the coolest things that I didn't learn till I was in, and because I'm public affairs, I was just utterly amazed. I was like, well, I guess I need to join the Navy and be a dolphin trainer because what?
So you look at those kinds of things. You look at even things back in history where we had the camels and horses that helped us with building and finding the West, trying to use those animals in that way. You think about independence. There are so many service dogs out here that are working with individuals with disabilities, whether it be a PTSD, a mental or emotional disorder, or a physical one. One of the ladies who spoke at the commission hearing talked about her son and discovered that he had this brain issue, and he started having horrible seizures. Those dogs are with their person 24/7. They do a couple of things. One, they bond with that child. They make them feel more secure. They sense when a seizure is coming on. They can go notify the parent or the adult in the house. And they also sometimes will put the body in such a position that they cushion the fall of the child and help them to not suffer. I mean, think about that. They bring that sense of independence back for people who are adults and they still want to have a life, whether they're blind or deaf or have mobility issues. Those dogs help them to be productive citizens and have their sense of independence, which we all know that helps affect your sense of self-worth and confidence. I mean, there's just so many positive things. So when you hear me talk about safety, security, and independence, and why I consider these animals and their handlers national treasures, their behavior, their actions speak volumes. By the time we finished with this presentation, we then had the public. There were 30 plus people standing by to do a 1-minute presentation to this commission. By the time the hours passed, this commission had heard from so many people in addition to our organization. They voted unanimously to approve our project. So it was a super proud moment for us and a huge hurdle, and just thrilled. Then it was a matter of going to the House and the Senate to get them to review it and put it on the floor and vote for it. In the end, they wound up rolling it into the omnibus bill at the end of the year, and it was passed and signed into law on December 29th by the president. Less than a year from introduction, we got this thing through, and everybody kept saying, my gosh, you're moving so fast. It's like, come on, you know me. It's a mission.
The only way I move.
It's the way we move, Tab. You know that. But we created a lot of enthusiasm about it that way too, because people realized we were very passionate about what we would do. But it's not just us. It's everybody we came into. They were like, oh my God, this is about time. We need this memorial. We need to recognize these animals and what they do for us.
And I'm sure as somebody's listening to this may, maybe the first time they hear about it, or maybe not, but I guess what's the next step, and how does somebody get involved to help with this? Now that it's cleared and it's going to happen, how can somebody get involved to make sure that it, is in completion and it's there, and that they can visit it in DC in a few years?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question, because now I'm in phase 2 of planning, which involves, we are creating a capital campaign, because we now have to raise millions of dollars to build this structure. We also have the ambassador program, which was planned about 18 months ago in my head. I am now putting it on paper and sharing it with the board. And it literally is a grassroots, recognize that from our political conversations, but it's literally building a grassroots effort across the country. We are going to be breaking the country up into regions, probably about 10, and looking for individuals to help us share the information. We've got brochures already created that we can hand out. One is a generic one that talks about the National Service Animals Monument Corporation. The other one that talks about the education program. In fact, if you go on our website at www.nsamproject.org. NSAM is the short for National Service Animals Monument Project.org, and you can look at the education program. We are providing resources for teachers, students, families, especially after COVID. People are getting sick and they, want to stay home. Well, here are some activities that students can be doing. Everything from coloring pages to advanced reading things for grades 5 and 8. We have some quizzes. There's one on there from the Department of Defense about service animals that I took that was pretty fun. We're looking to continue to expand that. Kathy Thistlewaite, who is our education program director, she was a teacher, and she's got a committee of several people. So how can people get involved? First of all, I think if they're really interested in getting involved to helping us, you can go on the website. We have a Monument Partners program. If you want to make like a monthly donation of $10 a month, we have incentive gifts for that. That will help us build over time. We also can just do an individual donation. You can get a lovely poppy pin from us that was designed by artist Susan Bahari. If you're looking to actively get involved, we have advocate positions. At some point, we'll have ambassador positions once we get that program up and running. I have some openings on the board coming up. I'm specifically looking for a public affairs director and a personnel director. Those are 2 new positions that we're adding simply because we're going to be getting bigger. So I need to have the people to do that. What are your requirements? Some experience in that field, a passion for animals, a willingness to work and be a part of a great team. Just really love this group. So again, check out our website, www.nsam, that's NSAM project.org.
And I think something to bring up too, especially for like those transitioning veterans, one of the things is I think sometimes you can very much build your resume by doing these type of things, by volunteering and by making an impact. And this is such a great way to especially maybe do something you've never done, or to gain some in the civilian sector experience. This is a great way to do it, whether it's this organization or another organization, but looking at those nonprofits that you can help support and using the assets you have. And obviously you can almost teach a Marine to do anything, right? Like give them some free food and you can probably figure it out. But I think that that's another way to look at it. If you're wanting to get involved, there's so many things that you can get from this experience, but also that you can add to your resume. And so I think that all of those opportunities sound amazing, and what a great way to get involved past just monetary, but obviously like money's needed. I'm so glad that we got you on the podcast and that we were able to talk about, your time in the Marine Corps and then how the Marine Corps helped you to do all these amazing things. And I think the final question that we ask is, if you had to take the oath again, if you had the opportunity, knowing what you know now, would you still have joined the Marine Corps?
Without question, yes. The camaraderie that I enjoyed as a Marine was unique to me. When you think about back in the 70s, women were just starting to push and becoming more involved. You didn't really have girls involved with team sports, which I think is one of the best things that's happened to girls growing up. Just seeing the fact that I was a part of that changing era, not just from the uniforms. We were the first class to do qualification on the M16A1. I pushed to be able to do the 45 cal. And the CO said, well, it's not in your MOS. It's like, okay, so I went and did some competition shooting in Okinawa. And on the Far East Network News that night, they announced that I outshot the MP battalion. CO calls up my commanding officer, says, send her to the range. That's the thing I liked about the Corps. If you proved yourself, it didn't matter who you were, green or dark green, woman or man, you were a Marine first. And I will tell you, I didn't see that same level of equality in other places that I've worked since. They truly do see you according to your uniform and what you've done. They don't hand out ribbons and stuff in the Corps. You earn everything. And consequently, you earn the respect of your fellow Marines. Having those opportunities to gain confidence that you can expand your knowledge based on how hard you want to push, So I would encourage anyone, if there's veterans out there who are looking for a place to share passion, to have teamwork and camaraderie, contact us, because I want to hear from people if they're interested in joining us in some capacity. I always do an individual Zoom, see where the person's at and see if there's a way that we can work together. Maybe they discover I'm too pushy and they don't want to go there. Whatever. But this is a beautiful mission. And in the end, our corporation will be delivering to the United States, the people of this country, a memorial to celebrate service animals and their handlers. Something we really can celebrate.
And what a way, as you said earlier, that you were looking for that connection to your community, and that this is something that resonates with every community across America and should resonate with almost everybody who has had an experience with an animal or knows somebody who a service animal. And so I think that there's just great opportunity to connect and to be involved in a community and feel like you're involved and feel like you have that connection. And so I want to thank you today so much for sharing your story and sharing about the organization and how people can get involved.
My pleasure. This is really about the human animal bond. It is strong, whether it's with you and your pet, or you as a handler and a service animal. There is no doubt that human animal bond is very strong amongst people and the animals that they associate with. It's a very strong thing, and it's a beautiful thing.
This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Theresa's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of the Marine Corps history. Her service matters. Her story matters. Not every Marine story is the same. We didn't all join the military for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a veteran for their service, I'm going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.